King of the Ring, Stone Cold Steve Austin, an incredible victory.
The first thing I want me done is to get that piece of crap out of my ring.
Hello Internet, my name is Damian Michaels, but you can call me Blue, and welcome back to another episode of Brews. So last week, we played a deck utilizing Umori as the companion and Sidisi as the commander for Brawl. This was the start of a mini-series I'm doing where we play a Brawl deck with each legal companion. This week, we're continuing that by moving on to Zirda the Dawnbreaker. We have Kenrith the Return King as our commander, and because of Zirda, we're playing a ton of different cards with activated abilities. You'll get to see quite a few of them in the game, so I'm only going to talk about Helm of the Host because at the time I was recording for this video, Helm of the Host was bugged on Arena. I forgot to take it out of the deck before I started recording because I knew it was bugged, so when I drew it, I just didn't play it because I didn't want to exploit it. One of the games, it does sit in my hand for a good chunk of the match, mocking me and my terrible memory. That being said, we're just going to get into the games because it's much more fun to show you this deck than talk about it.
Game 1, we're on the play against the new Ulamog. We mulligan twice and we keep it 6, putting a swamp to the bottom. We start things off with a Zagoth Triome and pass. Opponent starts with a Zalfiran Void to scry to the top. They follow this with Mishra's Bauble, and they crack it immediately to look at the top card they just scried to the top before passing. We untap, and opponent draws a card. We drop a Forest, followed by an Ornithopter of Paradise before passing it back. Opponent plays a Ghost Quarter and an Idol of the False God. We untap and play a Jetmir's Garden before passing. I could've, and probably should've, put Zirda in my hand, but I wanted to hold up Tail's End for something scary just in case. We untap, and this time we do put Zirda in hand. We play a Polluted Delta to continue holding up Tail's End. Opponent untaps and plays a Nesting Grounds, followed by a Thought-Knot Seer. Would you look at that? This is actually a solid target for Tail's End. We can counter the ETB, and now it's just a 4/4 that eventually draws us a card. Opponent gets in for 2 and passes. We untap and play a Stomping Ground, untapped, followed by Kenrith. We're going to hold up Swords just in case they do something wild. Opponent untaps and plays a Waste for their turn, followed by a Hedron Archive. This is again followed closely behind by an Urza's Incubator naming Eldrazi, and opponent passes to us. At the end step, we Swords the Thought-Knot Seer to draw us a card. We untap, and the opponent has a ton of mana if they untap. We need to clear away some of these rocks, so Sultai Charm blows up the Incubator, and after we attack with Kenrith, we exile the Archive with Anguished Unmaking. This keeps them off 10 mana, so they can't Ulamog yet. Opponent untaps and drops a Mind Stone, followed by a Moonsilver Key. They crack the key immediately to go get a Darksteel Citadel to hit their land drop. They end up making a token with the Idol and attack with the Mirror before passing the turn. We untap and start off with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, followed behind by Zirda. We play an untapped Overgrown Tomb and move to combat. We just attack with Kenrith and hit for 5. Once again, our opponent is approaching 10 mana. With a land drop next turn, they can cast Ulamog, so we drown and unlock the Mirror to buy ourselves at least one more turn. Opponent untaps and plays a Chromatic Ori, followed by a Firemind's Vessel. They sack their token to make another token. Okay. At this point, the opponent can for sure Ulamog next turn unless we draw something like Cyclonic Rift, so we just need to be prepared for that. At the end step, we use Agatha to eat the Mirror, which puts a counter on Zirda and the opponent passes. We untap and immediately go to combat to attack with Zirda and Kenrith. Opponent blocks Kenrith, and we give everything Trample with Kenrith's first ability. Then, I sped this up because I was dumb and didn't realize I didn't need to count my mana out, I just needed to activate the ability. I wanted to make sure I left up the right colors for Assassin's Trophy, but in doing so, I made myself look like a goof. Either way, we hit the opponent for 12, and then the trophy, the Ori. They grab a Waste, and we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and drops a Gyre Reach Sanitarium. This is immediately followed by Ulamog, which exiles half of our library. It enters as a 16/16, so I'm pretty sure they hit our Zakama. It's the only 9-drop in our deck. They can't do anything else, so we eat the Ori in their graveyard with Agatha's Soul Cauldron and go to our turn. We untap and play our other Training Grounds card, Biomancer's Familiar. We give the team haste, and I was about to start putting counters on everything, but we have lethal as it is. They can block Kenrith, but we can still get through for 8 damage, even without doing anything else. Game 2! We're on the play against Phylath, World Sculptor, and we keep at 7. We start things off by playing a Windswept Heath and passing. Opponent begins by playing a Forest and passing. We crack Heath for a Ketria Triumph. We untap and play a Temple Garden into Simone, Quandrix, Prodigy before passing. Opponent untaps and plays a Mountain before passing it back. We untap and play a Forest before passing. While playing, I couldn't decide if it was better to put Zirda in hand this turn or hold up Simone like I did. The line I took was incredibly inefficient mana-wise, but we'll see how it plays out. Opponent does some ramping and passes, so we untap and play Shalai, Voice of Plenty, followed by a Steam Vents. We move to combat and attack for 1 before passing it back. Definitely should have played Steam Vents untapped to drop the Vorpal Sword, but I did tell you that I was incredibly mana inefficient this game, so... Opponent does some more ramping, followed by a Toski, Bearer of Secrets before passing. We untap and draw a card and play Tamio, Field Researcher. We take it up, targeting our Shalai and their Toski. Since they have to attack with it, we're guaranteed to draw a card when they do, whether they can kill our Zimone or not. We attack with Shalai to draw Marsh Flats, which we then play, and finally we get down this Vorpal Sword that we could have played a lot earlier if we had played our lands correctly. Opponent untaps and immediately moves to combat, attacking Toski at our Tamio. We block with Zimone, and since Toski dealt combat damage, we get to draw a card. After combat, opponent drops a Multani, Yavamaya's Avatar before passing. At the end step, we crack our Marsh Flats to go grab Aspara's headquarters. We untap and use Tamio to freeze down their Toski and Multani. We move to combat and attack with Shalai, leaving Zimone back to block something with haste. After combat, we play Biomancer's Familiar and put Zirda into our hand before passing it back. Opponent untaps their lands, but not their dudes, and they start the turn by running out Phylath to make a bunch of plant tokens. They play a land and trigger Phylath to put 4 counters on a plant before they pass the turn. We untap and tick up Tamio on our Zimone and Shalai, then we move to combat and attack with everything. Opponent's board is actually kind of scary now with Toski and all those plants, so they block with what they can, which is what we wanted so we can have Familiar in the graveyard. We draw 2 cards thanks to Tamio, and post-combat we cast Farewell to eat all of the creatures and enchantments. I wanted to keep our Vorpal Sword around, so no point naming artifacts, and I didn't want Familiar exiled. Not nuking the graveyard might have been a mistake though, since they use collateral damage to sacrifice Multani so it doesn't get exiled. Smart move. On the opponent's turn, they untap and drop a Lithoform Engine for shenanigans before they put Multani in their hand from the graveyard. They play a land from what they picked up and pass the turn. We untap and play an untapped Hallowed Fountain followed up by Kenrith. After Kenrith, we drop Spella and tick up Tamio on both of our creatures. We don't have enough mana to give them haste, but we can hold back to block something with haste from our opponent. Opponent untaps and plays a land followed up by Multani again. We really gotta deal with this. We untap and oh! There's an Abzan Charm. Hashtag never didn't have it. We cast it to get rid of the Multani, then we tick up our Tamio on both of our dudes. We move to combat and attack with both to draw some cards. After combat, we play a Zagoth Triumph followed by a Prismatic Bridge. Opponent untaps and plays a Mountain so they can get their commander down again. They make 8 plant tokens and pass the turn. We untap and Bridge spins us into an Ornithopter of Paradise. Wonderful. We play a Verdant Catacombs and crack it to go get a Triumph. This is followed by our beefy boy Zakama Primal Calamity. It enters and we untap all of our lands. We then play Zirda and start using Zakama to shoot down the Phylath. we take out Tamio on Kenrith and Zirda before moving to combat. We attack for 7 and put our opponent to 1 life. I forgot to activate Kenrith, but that's okay. We can just use Zakama. Oh, never mind. Zakama only targets creatures. Duh. That's okay. Hopefully this Tail's End can keep us alive, so this doesn't cost us. Opponent untaps and drops a forest before going to combat. They attack with everything, those brave little 0/1s. Opponent plays Return of the Wild Speaker to give all non-human creatures +3/+3. Then they copy it with Lithoform Engine. This would actually be lethal, but we have Tail's End to stop the engine copy. We untap, and Bridge hits a Wren and Realmbreaker, but we should have one last turn, so we're not taking any chances. We just go straight to combat and do the respectful thing by attacking to end the game. So game 2, I realized I could have won the game at least a turn, maybe 2, before I did. I'm gonna be honest, I've never cast Zakama in this deck before, so I was excited to see what damage it could do without even realizing if I had just given it haste with Kenrith, it would have ended the game. So I guess that's on me for almost losing that to the pump spell they played. As far as losses, I actually have footage this time! One game was against Simic, and they spent about 10 minutes drawing cards and playing lands before they milled this out. The gameplay you're seeing is sped up by 8, and it's still pretty long. I only played this out because I was recording. This was cool to see the one time, but I don't ever want to play against this again. The other game was against Mardu, and they were tinkering with servos and turning them into treasures, and turning those treasures into pain and suffering. This was kinda cool, and I actually want to build this myself now. I've been wanting to play Mardu for a while, but I couldn't find a commander I actually liked, so don't be surprised to see this in a future episode. Anyway, that's all for today. If you want to check out the deck for yourself, you can find a link in the description below. While you're down there, feel free to tap that like button too. It adds more mana to the YouTube algorithm, and I greatly appreciate it. If you want to support the channel, go ahead and subscribe so you can become a member of the Blue Crew today. To check out some more of my content, you can click here to watch last week's video where we milled some cards and made some zombies with Sidisi and Imori, or you can check out this playlist to watch some of my shorts.